What's up, everyone? Matt Gajewski here. Back again talking college basketball. It is Tuesday, March the 4th. Conference tournaments are underway, mainly in the A-Sun, but a few more start tonight. The crazy Sun Belt is about to begin. Before we get started, I want to thank anyone who's liked, commented, or subscribed to the channel. There's been a lot of growth recently over the last weekend, and it helps a lot. So if you've done that, thank you. I really appreciate it. Even if you just watch, it's not lost on me that you choose to spend your time viewing this channel. All right, it's Tuesday. We have some awesome games up top, and we're highlighted really by the SEC every single Tuesday now, even before their conference tournament starts. So let's get right into it. Auburn takes on Texas A&M, so Auburn has to hit the road. They've already clinched the regular season championship. They are 6-point favorites on the road against Texas A&M with a 149.5 total. Only injury in the game is Denver Jones. He left their last contest and appears questionable here. Not 100% sure on his status as of right now. But as for motivation, Auburn's still chasing down that number one overall seed. They're likely to get it, but you start dropping games, and then Duke is very, very good as well. So you don't want to mess around with that. And they're also trying to get Janai Broome the Player of the Year. They've been very vocal about getting him that award. The best way to do so is keep winning games and performing above expectation. So I think they're going to be extremely competitive in this game, even though some people might raise the motivation question. This is the best resume in the country, 7-2 against the top 25. Both those losses in the top 5 to number 1 Duke and number 4 Florida. Wins against the best of the best, Houston, Tennessee, Alabama, you name it. This team has an awesome body of work. You don't need me to tell you that. Texas A&M is 3-4 against the top 25. They have wins over Bama, Kentucky, and Missouri. Pair of really bad losses for this team. They lost to number 80 UCF and number 51 Texas. This team lives dangerously, and we've seen the danger get to them in a couple games recently. They're 6th in rebounding, 1st in offensive rebounding. But this team is not large. They're 237th in effective height. Auburn's 77th. Auburn's excellent on the glass themselves, and Auburn's deep. This is just going to be a tough matchup for an A&M team that needs to live this way, unless they hit a weird outlier percent of their shots. Living on the glass against Auburn is not a place you want to be. And what's an outlier performance for A&M? This team is 315th in effective field goal, 325th from 3. Even if they jump towards like number 250 and technically experience positive regression, that's not going to beat Auburn. So when you live this dangerously and you're shooting this poorly, I find it hard to believe you're only a 6-point underdog in the game, especially with Auburn superior on defense, infinitely better on offense. And you can just go across the lineup. Janai Broome's going to create mismatches inside. Texas A&M is small. That's going to be difficult. Auburn is 37th in three-point percentage as a team nationally. Texas A&M's weakness is defending the perimeter. And even without Denver Jones, you have Tahad Pettiford, Chad Baker-Mazar, and Miles Kelly all hitting at least 37% of their threes. Pettiford's kind of trailing, but Kelly's over 40%. You have shooters everywhere. And the other way Texas A&M can win games is forcing turnovers. Auburn's 4th nationally in turnovers committed. In the good way. They don't turn the ball over ever. I guess foul margin technically is in favor of Texas A&M when you look at how this stacks up. Texas A&M, it does 4th, the 11th most fouls, and Auburn is 290th in fouls committed. But at the end of the day, I think that's largely just Auburn's deep. You go 3 deep in the interior, at least, with Broome, Cardwell, Chaney Johnson. Your guard position is deep. You can play super aggressive when you have 7 legitimate contributors, and that might be a little generous. They could go deeper than that. I play the Auburn -5.5. That's still available in some spots. I'm still seeing it out there. It's going through 6, so this is one I think does make some sense to take sooner rather than later. I don't think motivation's a concern. So we'll be back in Auburn as we have through much of the year. And as you've probably gathered, we are talking about gambling. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. You must be 21 or older to play in most areas. Huge Big 12 clash. BYU hits the road to take on Iowa State. This spread is currently 9 points in favor of the home Cyclones. The total's 149.5. BYU has not been great on the road, but this still came in a little north of what I expected. Both of these teams have sort of played towards the top of their expectation of late. Let's go through the resumes because there's no major injuries anymore. Iowa State appears finally healthy for the first time in really 2 months. BYU is 2-3 against the top 25. They picked off wins over Kansas and Arizona. Both of those were in the last 2 weeks, and they kind of needed those to shore up their body of work. They have 4 losses outside the top 50. Providence at 92, TCU at 82, Utah at 68, and Cincinnati at 50. And those are occurring on the road, which is a big situational, like this team's home court advantage is massive. Playing in Provo, you have the elevation. When they've hit the road, it's been difficult for them. Not only do you lose that, but road trips aren't exactly friendly in this conference. They've got a little better with some of the other West Coast teams. Now you have to go to Iowa State. Not an easy road trip for BYU, who struggled on the road plenty this year. Iowa State is 4-4 against the top 25 with wins over Marquette, who's back in the 25 now. Marquette, Texas Tech, Kansas, and Arizona. 3 losses outside the top 30. Oklahoma State at 97, 66 Kansas State, and 53 West Virginia. All those pretty concerning. You could poke a hole in each one. They didn't have at least one starter in every one of those games. And the 4-4 against the top 25, I would argue that should be 5-3. They had that weird loss to Arizona that only got to overtime on the half-court shot by Caleb Love. So it's been a little weird for Iowa State, largely because of illness and injury throughout the year. Momcilovic missed a month. Recently, they've been without Curtis Jones for a game, and Gilbert missed a pair of games. It is what it is. But now they're at full strength. They're 53rd in effective height, 37th in rebounding. Interesting, BYU, super effective on the glass. They're 16th in rebounding despite being 123rd in effective height. This matchup comes out pretty neutral. Shooting-wise, BYU's awesome. 3rd in effective field goal, 29th in three-point percentage. It's not going to be easy. Iowa State 6th defensively, but if you were looking for a weakness, I would point to their three-point defense, which currently is 134th. Again, there's room for growth with basically every Iowa State metric because of how unhealthy they've been. So I hesitate to really point to that as an advantage, but you still have Richie Saunders, Trevin Nell, both are over 44% from 3. Dawson Baker, Dallin Hall, and Mawot Mag aren't bad either. Mag doesn't take a lot of threes, but he's hitting 40%. So you do have a lot of shooters spacing in your favor if you're BYU. Iowa State's not bad themselves, though. They're 57th in effective field goal, 90th from 3. I really think there's room for growth with that three-point percentage because Momcilovic, their best three-point shooter, has missed over a month. And then Keyshawn Gilbert and Taman Lipsey are below last year's numbers from 3. So you have room for growth with both of them, especially Lipsey. You could argue the injury with him. He's clearly not playing 100%, but you'll never see him miss a game. As far as defense for BYU, 57th overall, outside the top 100, inside and out. Big weakness for them is the 3, 234th defending there. Big mismatch in favor of Iowa State. And lastly, turnover margin, Iowa State 19th at turnovers forced, BYU 166th in turnovers committed. A huge mismatch in favor of Iowa State. This is a really hard one to predict. Mathematically, given what we've seen body of work this year, we make this inside the 9 points. It's going to continue moving in Iowa State's direction. I made the mistake this weekend of playing Arizona in a very similar stylistic matchup, getting 6.5 and a number we made shorter than that. I think there's just a chance we haven't fully adjusted to 100% health with Iowa State, and perhaps this is the correct efficient number. I'm probably going to need 10 or something to play this, even though we're showing quite a bit of value. I'm just hesitant right now with how we're mathematically evaluating Iowa State. There's a chance they're just flat out better than what we have in the model right now. Georgia takes on South Carolina. This is a 1.5 spread in favor of South Carolina, the home team. 137 total. Only injury is Miles Stute for South Carolina. That is not new. They have one top 25 win all season, South Carolina. That is, it came against number 17 Clemson in overtime. They do have 3 losses. They do have a 3-point loss to 258 North Florida. So that's basically a completely damning piece on their resume. But I mean, outside of that, you have 1 loss outside the top 50 to LSU on the road. So to kind of sum up this South Carolina team, You're basically losing to everyone you're supposed to, or yes, losing to everyone you're supposed to and beating everyone you're supposed to. There's not much in between, which might surprise a lot of people considering South Carolina. They were last place in the SEC for a while. But you only have 2 losses outside the top 50 the entire season. They have single-digit losses to Auburn, Vanderbilt, Florida, Mississippi State, Texas A&M. This team is definitely not as bad as people think. I mean, there's a real possibility that this team would beat Drake or something. Anyway, Georgia on the other side, 3-8 against the top 25. They have wins over St. John's, Kentucky, and Florida. Insane to me that this is a bubble team, considering they have 1 loss lower than number 31 all year, which came to Arkansas. Stylistically, Georgia's 24th in effective height, 53rd in rebounding. They come ahead of South Carolina in both metrics, who's 103 in height, 86th in rebounding. Essentially, every single metric is in favor of Georgia. Let's talk shooting. 103 in effective field goal, South Carolina 262. 2-point percentage, 79th for Georgia, 204th for South Carolina. 3-point percentage, 208th for Georgia, not a strength, but South Carolina's 288th. And then you look at total defense. Georgia's 28th, South Carolina's 49th. The one place I think Georgia has a pretty stark advantage in the periphery, turnovers forced, they're 104th at that. South Carolina's 286th at turnovers committed. Essentially, what beating South Carolina comes down to is stopping Colin Murray Boyles. He is the 19th most efficient player in the SEC. South Carolina does not have another player on their roster inside the top 100. It's not an easy place to play going down to Columbia. I'm a little surprised this has moved South Carolina's direction. I actually played this at a bad number, ate a bad line at the pick'em, played it again at plus 1.5, and that's a number I'm comfortable with. I wouldn't be surprised to see some buyback coming on the Georgia side. This team is more talented. They're also healthier right now. Tyron Lawrence recently returned, giving them another option at point guard. I'm a little surprised by this, especially considering Georgia's body of work of late. They have 2 big wins recently coming off the Florida victory. And then over the weekend, they beat Texas. Now, Texas isn't exactly an elite win, but still, these are victories. And it was on the road. These are victories that this Georgia team needed. So we'll continue to move forward with the current numbers we have, see where this goes through the day. Nebraska, Ohio State. Bubble game in the Big Ten. 6-point spread in favor of the home team, Ohio State, 144 total. No major injuries. With Nebraska, Rinka Mass has been out all year. Michi Johnson left the team for Ohio State. It's a rematch from February 9th. Nebraska won 79-71 on their home floor, despite Ohio State shooting 40% from 3. A couple of advantages on both sides of these teams. We actually saw it basically play out. Before I get ahead of myself, Ohio State's advantage is shooting. They took that home in the first matchup. Nebraska's taller. They crush on the glass. They win with fouls. That's exactly what happened in this game and how Nebraska got the victory. As far as resumes, Nebraska's 1-6 against the top 25. Their only win in that grouping is Illinois in overtime at 19, who didn't have Tomislav Ivicic in the game. They have 5 losses outside the top 60. This is pretty bad. I'm very concerned about this body of work. I can't believe Nebraska was in the field for as long as they were. But this game is really important. It's a chance for them to improve their road resume, get another decent win. They need this. Ohio State also does. They're 3-6 against the top 25 with wins over Kentucky, Purdue, and Maryland, so much better on the higher end. They also have a couple bad losses. They dropped to number 58 Pittsburgh in overtime and 52 Nebraska. So not quite as bad on the low end as what we've seen Nebraska put on the floor. But this team also has lost too many games. They just flat out need a win to keep their tournament hopes alive. As far as stylistic advantages, briefly mentioned them earlier. Nebraska's 52nd in effective height. Ohio State is 227th. Rebounding, this is a pretty stark advantage for Nebraska, at least in the last game. If you just look at season-long numbers, it actually kind of favors Ohio State, which is a bit surprising. Nebraska's 210th, Ohio State 188th. But Nebraska out-rebounded Ohio State 37-28. In the first matchup, I think that's just largely leaning on their taller lineup. Shooting-wise, Nebraska's 144th in effective field goal, 248th from 3. Their best matchup inside versus those Ohio State bigs. And that smaller lineup Ohio State's playing, Juwan Gary, he needs to have a good game. He was in double figures in the first contest, but basically Nebraska's advantage kind of hinge on him because you're not getting much out of like Berkey, Byung-Tunsel inside either, even though he was in double figures in the first game. But you kind of need to lean on this, and Bryce Williams getting to the paint, of course. On the other side, Ohio State, 65th in effective field goal, 27th from three. That's where Nebraska struggles defensively. And Ohio State hit 40% in their first game. So Bruce Thornton, John Mobley, these are the players that need to have good games for Ohio State. They both hit over 40% of their threes, so this should be wide open for them. Not much stands out on the periphery. Ohio State gets into foul trouble. They did in the first game. Nebraska shot more free throws, and that was another way that they ended up edging this. We make this almost exactly on the spread of the -6, almost exactly on the total as well. So there's no real lean for us in this game. Maybe we'll end up playing this later throughout the day as the line moves. I guess briefly on that, we put all these plays into Discord when they show value. So early in the days, that'll be when we first released the model, when we took a lot of these. And then later in the day, when injuries break, we play a lot of them as well that you won't necessarily see on this video. But there's also player projections, literally projecting points, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals, minutes for all of the major games on the slate on a Tuesday night. That's going to be like 20 games. And yeah, we'll have March Madness tools as well. So if you're interested in that, the Discord is available in the link below. No long-term commitments. Hopefully you guys check it out for March. All right, let's move on. SEC bubble clash. Arkansas takes on Vanderbilt. The spread in this game is 6.5 in favor of the home Vanderbilt. Commodores 150 total. Maybe Vanderbilt's not on the bubble anymore. That's probably not giving them enough credit. Injuries in this game on the Arkansas side. Adu Thero and Boogie Fland have been major losses. Arkansas just is coming off an absolute slaughtering at the hands of last place South Carolina. The ups and downs with this team are actually pretty wild. I actually thought it was a good idea to bet Arkansas in that game. If you didn't look, check the box score, see how that went. Spoilers, it was bad. Anyway, Vanderbilt is 3-6 against the top 25. They beat Missouri in OT over the weekend. Embarrassing for Missouri. They beat Kentucky and they beat Tennessee. So they have some high-end wins. They also have one low-end loss. They did drop a game to Drake at number 60, but that's their only loss outside the top 50. So it's a pretty good body of work for Vanderbilt, even though this team is flawed. Arkansas has problems. Injuries have something to do with it for sure, but they just got blown out at South Carolina, who's 67. 2-7 against the top 25. They beat Missouri and Kentucky. They have two losses outside the top 50. They're both concerning, though. LSU and South Carolina, the two worst teams in this conference. I guess there's a lot of advantage for this Arkansas team via height if they can use it. My real question is just, can they use it? 9th in effective height, but only 192nd in rebounding. They're behind Vanderbilt in rebounding. So let's look at these. Arkansas 9th in effective height. Vanderbilt's 318th. They have the smallest lineup in the SEC. But Vanderbilt's ahead of them in rebounding, 161 to 192. Vanderbilt, they should not be ahead of this Arkansas team in total rebounding. It doesn't really make sense to me. They do attack the offensive glass. Arkansas is not very good there, so that needs to be at least considered. But man, I'm just a little shocked by this matchup. Shooting-wise, these teams are almost identical. Arkansas 107th in effective field goal. Vandy's 108th. They're almost even across the board. Where they're not, the gaps are small. I think defensively is where you really can see Arkansas potentially take advantage of Vanderbilt. They both have weaknesses, though. Arkansas is 19th overall. Vanderbilt 74th. Arkansas is top 100 inside and out. And Vanderbilt is 342nd in three-point defense. It's just, am I confident Arkansas really exploits this? They're 214th in three-point percentage. We just saw them shoot horrifically against South Carolina. And inside, yeah, the advantage is a little bit better in favor of Arkansas because Vandy's so 186 there. But man, do you really want to back Arkansas without their two best players now? Thero is their second best. Flan was their first. Maybe you could argue they've played a little better cohesively without Flan, but they don't have any idea what their roster is supposed to be like at this point. Like, who are they going to actually give minutes to? Sometimes it's Evis Hitch getting 20. Sometimes it's 30. Sometimes Brazil steps up for extra minutes. Then you have like Billy Richmond randomly playing 24 minutes off the bench and Jonas Aidoo. I'm just not sure what this team is trying to accomplish and what their actual approach to games are. It's just volatile game to game. So yes, we show a little bit of value on Arkansas. I think I've just flat out learned my lesson with this team and would need more points. It's close enough to the projected spread where it's just a lean and one I don't plan on taking with the disaster Arkansas has been this year, especially on the road. With a Vanderbilt team that's on the right side of the bubble, but probably still could use some extra wins to solidify their position. Similar contest in the Big Ten, we have Indiana taking on Oregon, 6.5 point spread in favor of the home Oregon, 147 total. Indiana has been similar to Arkansas in a lot of ways. And Oregon, honestly, has been a little similar to Vanderbilt. Nothing stylistically there, but Oregon has some of the highs and then some of the lows that a team like Vanderbilt has. And I would say they're on the right side of the bubble still. In fact, I would almost guarantee that. But they've slipped on the seed line quite a bit since their early season run, winning in Vegas and whatnot. But let's go resumes. Indiana 2-6 against the top 25. They have some of the best wins. They have a road win over Michigan State. They also beat Purdue, but they also have losses to 52 Nebraska and 74 Iowa. I will say there's just a lot on this resume that I think people will overlook even in losses. Lost to UCLA by 4, Michigan by 3, Purdue by 5, Maryland by 1. They're right there in a lot of these games, and you don't get credit for being right there. But as far as evaluating this team against the spread, I think it's noteworthy. Oregon's 4-3 against the top 25. They beat A&M, they beat Alabama, Maryland, and Wisconsin. Wisconsin a little fluky. Their win expectancy was like 5% at one point, and they end up forcing overtime and getting a win. Crazy game. They also have losses to number 89, Minnesota, and 52, Nebraska, so it's not always pretty with Oregon. I am also not sure what Indiana is doing with their rotation. This is similar to Arkansas. There was reportedly some off-the-court stuff with Mackenzie Mbako and Umar Ballo. And then there was the Malik Renault illness. So to give you a snapshot of like the last 2 weeks, there's the Ballo and Mbako rumors that they might get kicked off the team. They don't. Instead, they just hit the bench and play limited minutes. But then Malik Renault gets sick and has to go to the hospital. So Mbako and Ballo are sort of forced back into bigger roles because Renault is not available. Then Renault comes back in their last game, and they all sort of split minutes. I don't know who plays in this game and how much they play. Neither Ballo nor Mbako played 25 minutes in the last game, played over that, so I'm just not sure. They also moved Miles Rice to the bench. Trey Galloway played less minutes in favor of Anthony Leal and Luke Goody. Goody is a very limited player. He's awesome offensively. He's the only one that can hit threes and really shoot anywhere on the floor, but he's the worst defender they have on this team. So not only is it players that either are limited offensively, awesome on defense, or like what are the minute allocations going to be? I just don't know we can actively predict that, which makes Indiana very difficult to project mathematically. And they do have some advantages on paper. I mean, they should neutralize Oregon's height. These are two top 22 teams in effective height. They have the advantage on the glass, 84 to 121, but I just don't know if they can actually use it with their personnel. Indiana is 116th in effective field goal, but they can't shoot 248 from 3. That's why you got to jam like Luke Goody minutes. Fortunately, they don't take a lot of threes. They're reliant on interior scoring, and Oregon is a little bit suspect inside. They're 182nd there. Biddle's a pretty good defender, but he doesn't play every single minute, and he can get in foul trouble, and you can exploit the other bigs. Oregon, however, 106th in effective field goal, 122nd from 3, with a lot of room for improvement there. You have Jackson Shelstad and Keyshawn Bartholomew hitting over 40% of their threes, but like Bamba shooting way below his season averages, or I guess I should say his career averages. He's experiencing some positive regression. In Oregon, when they shoot the ball up to what you'd expect, this team is very lethal. You also have Biddle inside to give you a well-balanced offense. It's not going to come easy inside against Indiana, depending on who they play, but this is a team that has more advantages, in my opinion. Turnover margin vastly favors Oregon. Indiana reckless with the ball at times. But this also is more an IKB. It's betting on it, this Oregon team actually experiencing positive regression, because when you actually throw in what they've played with this year and what they've actually put on the floor, this shows some, at least a little bit of value Indiana's direction. And I can see it both ways. These are two talented teams that haven't lived up to expectation. Indiana more so than Oregon. But man, Indiana going across the country to play an Oregon team still trying to improve their seed line. I can't take it, even though we show value on the Indiana side. Maybe if this moves quite a bit throughout the day, but I'm going to be staying away from these two bad Big Ten clashes and the SEC bubble games. Texas plays Mississippi State tonight. Just no thank you. There's more more actionable games in the greasy section, which let's kind of start pivoting there now. New Mexico takes on Nevada, and this isn't super greasy. It's like number 1 versus number 7 in the Mountain West. New Mexico can certainly take home the number 1 seed as long as they hold off Colorado State and Utah State. Nevada's floundering a little bit, but still 7's not terrible in this conference. It's fairly deep. Injuries in the game, Nevada, Trey Coleman and Daniel Foster. New Mexico has a clean bill of health now that they returned Donovan Dent. These teams played on January 3rd. New Mexico won 82-81 in OT. Nevada did not have Tyler Rollison, but they're also not healthy now. New Mexico only shot 28% from 3, but they crushed Nevada on the free throw line, drew a lot of fouls in that game. And this team has a better body of work. Just against top 100 teams, again, we'll frame different conferences. Sometimes we use the top 25. Sometimes we use the top 100. Mountain West doesn't have a lot of top 25 opportunities, so we'll use the top 100. New Mexico is 11-4 against that competition. Nevada's 4-10. The best wins for New Mexico, they did beat 27 UCLA. Nevada beat 28 VCU, so that's comparable. New Mexico has 2 losses outside the top 100 to 136 New Mexico State and 171 San Jose. Both were by single digits. Nevada has 3 losses outside the top 100 to number 121 Washington State, 157 Loyola Marymount, and 182 Wyoming. Both teams are top 35 in height. New Mexico outranks Nevada 58 to 146 in rebounding. And I think there's a chance this gap is even extended further now that Nevada has been playing without Trey Coleman, who was the 16th most efficient player in the Mountain West before going down. He's out for the year. Shooting-wise, this does favor Nevada. New Mexico can be reliant on Donovan Dent. They're 156th in effective field goal, 147th from 3. But their offensive efficiency is actually a little ahead of Nevada. And I think a lot of this is just, even though Donovan Dent is the engine of the offense, he's very good at delivering to his players, his teammates. True Washington, 37% from 3. When they do miss shots, Nelly Jr. Joseph is one of the top rebounders in the country. So it's a well-composed offense. Nevada, 46th in effective field goal, 64th in three-point percentage. Pretty reliant on Nick Davidson and Xavier Dussel, but both of them hit over 39% of their threes. That's also the best matchup for them to attack. Both of these teams are a little weaker in perimeter defense. But interestingly, neither team has an elevated three-point rate. When you look at how these teams play, New Mexico's 330th in three-point rate. Nevada's 224th. If you were to attack one of these defenses, I think you do with both of them. You probably just attack the perimeter. They're both outside the top 240 in three-point defense. So it's interesting. Does one of these teams choose to shoot more or not? I don't have the answer to that. Turnover-wise, I think both these teams should be solid. Nevada does struggle with fouls more often, but both these teams are horrible at shooting free throws outside the top 259. What this comes down to me is you have the better body of work in New Mexico playing the more injured team in Nevada. How much is home court really worth here? Because that is not being factored in appropriately, in my opinion. I think it is getting too much of a boost. We have New Mexico actually favored in this spot. I played this at a pick'em last night. Second game now that's moved against me. I have not gone back and played the +1, but honestly debating it again. But even better line than what I played. I think New Mexico is the side to potentially look at in this game. Let's continue down the path of Greece. And here we go. Sun Belt tournament kicks off tonight, or tips off tonight, I should say. Coastal Carolina plays Southern Miss, and this is the progressive bye structure. Essentially, these two teams, if they were to win the conference tournament, would have to win 7 games in 7 days. Conversely, first and second place in this conference only have to play 2 games if they're going to win. Coastal Carolina, 2-point underdog, Southern Miss. And the total is 141. Injuries, Coastal Carolina's Nas Brown has been out. Southern Miss Andre Curbelo kicked off the team. This is a rematch from February 20th. Coastal Carolina won 87-78. This was the legendary Andre Curbelo game, his final game where he fouled out in 10 minutes. Technicals and everything you could ever imagine with Andre Curbelo, ending a storied run for him as a player. Coastal had an outlier shooting game. They hit 43% of their threes and dominated on the glass. That is an advantage for them. Resume-wise, Southern Miss 3 top 200 wins all year, highlighted by a win over UW-Milwaukee. Shame on my Panthers. But they have 4 losses outside the top 300. Coastal Carolina does not have a top 200 win. Their best win came against 210 Campbell, and they have nothing else higher than 270. 4 losses outside the top 300 as well. On the Coastal Carolina advantage is much taller. 25th in effective height, 132nd in rebounding. Southern Miss is 338th in effective height, 211th in rebounding. Coastal has size advantages. They have advantages on the glass. They're going to need them because even though they're the better shooting team, they're still horrible at shooting. 243 in effective field goal percentage. They're actually 95th from 3. And basically all that comes from Jordan Battle, who's hitting 44.5%. But Southern Miss best quality on defense is their 3-point defense. So it's not an easy matchup. Southern Miss, 292 in effective field goal, 340th from 3, better scoring inside. But again, that's where you're going against that Coastal Carolina height. I'm just not sure what they're doing. Their best shooter, Kobe Montgomery, at 43% from 3, played 8 minutes in the last game. Both these teams are horrible on the periphery, turnovers, fouls, all of it. But honestly, this just comes down to superior metrics across the board. Even though Coastal is tall, they rarely use it effectively. Even though they hit 43% of their threes in the first game, that's not always what they're doing, and that is Southern Miss strength. They're just overall superior body of work and efficiency metrics lead us to Southern Miss minus the 1.5. It's at 2 now. I'll say this. I'm not really comfortable going beyond that. These teams are both awful, which is how you end up playing in the opening round of the Sun Belt Conference tournament. We just played this basically knowing it would move. Don't think we can play anything further beyond the 2. I would stop there. Horizon League tournament starts tonight too, and there's a pair of totals that are worth mentioning. Detroit Mercy takes on Northern Kentucky. 13-point spread in favor of Northern Kentucky. It is a 139 total. There's some injuries in the games we're going to talk about from here on out, and I don't know if these players are coming back. Reporting is poor, so there is a chance these players were being held out for the conference tournament specifically. A team like the Horizon definitely not live for at-large bids. But when you can sustain health or at least preserve health for the tournament, maybe you give yourself a chance at a run. But Detroit has a couple of injuries. Legend Gator and Grant Gondrezick. I don't think either of them play, but we'll see. Northern Kentucky's healthy. As far as these teams matching up, Horizon's still a lovely league where you get the home and homes. Miss those in the bigger conferences. Northern Kentucky took the first one 73-60 on their home floor. That's 133 total points. Detroit took the second matchup 68-57 on their home floor. That's a 125 total. In the first game, both teams were efficient, hitting over 40% of their threes. The second game was less efficient. But as you can see, the thing I want to highlight here is the pace of the game, the total, which is at 139. Under is where I'm looking. Both these teams are slow. You have Northern Kentucky at 272 in tempo. Detroit's at 209. We've seen these possessions play out twice now in 2 separate games. One efficient, one not efficient. They both came in under. And when you look at these teams, defense is a relative strength. I say relative because I'm not sure you'd call anything a strength. But Detroit is 252 on offense, 276 on defense. Northern Kentucky 263 on offense, 227 on defense. Detroit just can't shoot. They're 350th in effective field goal. Can't score inside. But they almost never take threes either, so they're only taking shots inside. Just not really a well-composed offense. Their highest volume shooters are all below 35%. Their second most efficient scorer was Legend Gator, who's been out. Northern Kentucky's 245th in effective field goal, so a bit better than Green Bay, but they're outside the top 200 in both interior and perimeter scoring. And interestingly, when you dive into Green Bay, for having such a bad defense, they're 231st on the interior and 118th in three-point defense. Those numbers aren't horrific. A lot of what they're doing defensively that brings their numbers down are rebounding-wise, turnover-wise. So I think this is actually a pretty good matchup for the under to come in, as we've seen it come in twice already. Northern Kentucky does force a lot of turnovers against Green Bay. It's 54th in turnovers forced versus 286 turnovers committed. We make this well under the projected total right now. Pacing should line up in favor, and unless you have an outlier efficiency game or something, this basically is going to come down to, does a team make their shots? And neither team is particularly good at that. Closing this out on the horizon, we have Green Bay taking on Oakland. These teams just played over the weekend. This is an 11.5-point spread in favor of Oakland. Totals 147. Injuries galore. Green Bay's been without Anthony Roy, Preston Ruttinger, and Jonathan Levy. Oakland was without Jalen Jones in their last game, and their last game was against Green Bay. They just played over the weekend. The game went into overtime. Oakland won 87-84, which might be alarming if you're considering a total, which is my favorite play in this game, another under. When you look at how this ended in regulation, it was at 142. Both teams also shot the ball efficiently. So you have a lot working in that direction just from historics. In the first game, that ended Oakland winning at home 68-54. That game did not have the same efficiency. Both teams were at or below 32% from three. So like the game we just talked about, we have two examples of how this game could play out. One where they shoot efficiently, went under the total. One where they shot poorly, well under the total. And this starts with pace for me. Green Bay is fast. They're 90th in pace, but Oakland 346th. In general, slower teams have an easier time slowing down the pace. So always looking at the slower team versus the faster team. And Green Bay actually is a little better shooting. They're 158th, which might surprise you considering their offensive efficiency numbers so bad, but they're pretty decent inside and out. The problem is Oakland's defense is also pretty good, especially on the inside, where they're 118th on interior defense. I think the biggest threat to this not getting to the total, or I guess eclipsing the total, is Green Bay just simply getting hot from three, because they're not horrible at shooting them. Oakland's not great at defending the perimeter. But also, unless Roy returns, which I don't think he will, he's by far their most efficient offensive player, and they just don't have a lot of other scoring options with Roy out. And on the other side, you do have Oakland ranking 100 spots ahead of Green Bay in terms of overall offensive efficiency. But I'm surprised by this considering how bad of a shooting team Oakland is. 353 in effective field goal, and that's largely because they're 343 from three. And despite this horrible percentage, they're still 92nd in three-point rate. This is offensive ineptitude. I know you just came off a season with Golke raining threes and actually getting you wins in the tournament. And Malcolm Christie was supposed to be that guy for this Oakland team. But you're 343 at three-point percentage and you're 92nd in three-point rate. You want to bring the threes down a little bit at some point? I mean, what are we doing here? Green Bay is 336 on defense, so I guess avenues to an outlier performance could be open in this game. But man, this team is just shot so poorly, I'm not confident in it. And anytime when you're talking totals and you're thinking of ways you could lose, when most of them come down to outlier performances, you're sitting in a pretty good range. Oakland is a little better rebounding, and they're 48th in offensive rebounds. That's kind of like baked in this matchup. These teams are both really small. But I think overall pacing works in your favor. Shooting, as bad as it is, works in your favor. And you're getting a generous amount of points here. I played a 148. This one did move in our favor. 147 is completely fine. If you add up the scores for both of these teams, it still comes in below that. So that one I think is worth mentioning. All right, went a little long today. Wednesday's an awesome slate too. So we're going to a lot of you, or at least some of you, asked about recording these the night before. It's very hard, especially with the low-level conferences. The lines sometimes aren't out. And then as tournaments continue, that's going to become even harder because outcomes of games won't be finished until well into the night. So some of them are going to have to be the morning of the day. I apologize for that. We'll do night before anytime we can. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow, and good luck.